Shaquille Big Shaq. O'Neal thought his wealth could build peace. Until a quiet corner, a blind child, and a forgotten man shattered that illusion. When he sees a black sanitation worker feeding a silent little girl with unseen scars, he uncovers a sealed custody case buried by the state, and a child the world tried to erase. The deeper he digs, the louder the system pushes back. But some truths won't stay buried. Because this time, the fight isn't on the court, it's in the streets, the courts, and the soul of a nation. Big Shaq sees black sanitation worker feed his blind daughter, and changes his life forever. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Sometimes the richest man in town is also the loneliest. The mornings always began the same way for Shaquille O'Neal. He'd rise before the sun, pad across imported hardwood floors in bare feet, and make himself a cup of strong black coffee, no sugar, no cream. The espresso machine was state-of-the-art, the kind you'd only see in a Michelin-starred kitchen or the home of a man whose bank account had no ceiling. Yet there was nothing extravagant about how Shaq moved. No personal chef, no entourage, just him, a mug, and the sound of silence echoing across 12,000 square feet of polished solitude. Outside, the Georgia sky shifted from a sleepy gray to pale blue. Shaq sat on the edge of the back patio, massive frame perched lightly on stone, watching the world come alive. He liked this time, before headlines, before meetings, before the noise of celebrity and expectation, a time that still felt human, normal, even. For all the world knew, Big Shaq was still the life of the party, the NBA legend turned businessman, turned media powerhouse. But there was something hollow in it now. His children were grown and scattered. His ex-wife Shawnee had remarried and moved to the West Coast. The house had become more museum than home, a gallery of trophies and expensive furniture that no one really sat in. On that particular Tuesday morning, needing something different, Shaq decided to take a longer route on his drive to the gym. The Bentley purred like a panther as it rolled down a suburban street he hadn't traveled in years, an older part of town where sidewalks cracked and front porches held stories. He didn't expect to stop. He didn't expect to see anything. But as the car slowed near a faded corner store with flickering neon, his eyes caught something that held him tight. There, sitting on an overturned crate next to a rusted trash bin, was a black sanitation worker. His uniform was stained from years of labor, boots heavy with dust, gloves frayed at the seams. But what struck Shaq wasn't the man's exhaustion. It was the gentleness in his movements. Seated beside him was a little girl, no more than 9, her eyes closed and head tilted as if listening to a song only she could hear. She was blind, that much was clear. Her pale blue dress was modest, slightly worn, and her hair was pulled into tight twists with beads at the end. The man reached into a small paper bag and pulled out a sandwich, cutting it into small pieces, feeding her slowly, carefully. Each bite was offered with the kind of patience rarely seen in public, like every motion mattered, like feeding her wasn't an obligation, but an honor. Shaq pulled the Bentley into a side lot and watched from behind tinted windows. It wasn't the kind of scene you expected on a Tuesday morning in suburban Georgia. It wasn't meant for an audience, and yet it gripped him harder than anything he'd seen on a screen in years. There was no talking between the two, no nods or visible smiles. Yet the girl's face carried a peace that stood out in a world where most people wore masks of performance. The man, tall, lean, with flecks of silver in his beard, sat beside her with silent devotion, sharing a sandwich and something deeper. It wasn't clear if they were father and daughter. There was no resemblance. But their bond had weight, the kind of weight Shaq could feel pressing against his chest. He didn't know why he came back the next day, or the day after that. Maybe he just wanted to confirm what he saw was real. Maybe he needed a reason to get out of that mansion that had become more mausoleum than mansion. Whatever it was, he returned, always at the same hour, always watching from across the street. The pair came like clockwork, Tuesdays and Fridays, always the same spot, same sandwich bag, same routine, no interaction with anyone else, no eye contact with strangers. The girl never looked scared. The man never looked away from her. Shaq started asking around quietly. Clerks at the corner store shrugged. They'd seen the man, sure. He was on a city contract, kept to himself. No one knew his name. The girl? Most assumed she was his, but no one had seen her in a local school. No files, no records, no real trail. The mystery grew heavier. It wasn't just curiosity that pulled at Shaq. It was the memory of his own mother, Lucille, struggling to feed 5 mouths with nothing but stubbornness and canned beans. It was the way that man fed the girl, a method that echoed something Lucille used to do. Pause between bites, feel the weight of hunger against time, and serve with dignity. Shaq's next move was unplanned. He brought a small paper bag of his own, 2 turkey subs from a deli up the road, and walked across the street on foot, leaving the Bentley idling behind. As he approached the pair, he noticed the man glance sideways, alert, protective. Shaq held out the bag. Not too close, not too sudden. Brought extras, he said simply. The man didn't move. The girl turned slightly, head lifted like she heard the low rumble of Shaq's voice as texture rather than tone. I'm not trying to bother y'all, Shaq added. Just been watching. That ain't creepy, is it? The man didn't respond. His body remained still, but his eyes narrowed, sharply, like he'd measured men before and found them wanting. Shaq left the bag on the curb, nodded once and walked away. No one touched the sandwiches. The following Friday, Shaq returned, parked again, waited again, and when the two appeared, something shifted. The man nodded once, not an invitation, not even acknowledgement, just a crack in the wall. Shaq took it as something. For a week, nothing more happened. Then came a moment. As the girl chewed quietly, the man pulled a folded cloth from his back pocket and gently wiped a smudge of sauce from her chin. She smiled, barely, but clearly, and whispered something. The man leaned in, listening. When he straightened, there were tears in his eyes. Shaq felt something twist inside him. Something raw, something ancient. He knew, then, that this wasn't just a moment between a worker and a child. This was a story, one buried beneath noise, beneath class, beneath race and silence, and things people in gated communities preferred not to see. Shaq had always believed in helping, but helping from his pedestal had often meant throwing money at things. This was something else. The next day, he asked his driver to trail the sanitation truck. He watched the route, watched how every stop felt mechanical, except the one where the man sat with the girl. No matter how dirty the street, how sour the air, that one moment, those 20 minutes were sacred. The streets whispered other truths too. An older white woman scowled as they passed. A corner store clerk rolled his eyes. An HOA security guard hovered too long. None of them dared say anything, but the hostility was clear, unspoken, heavy, like the air in a courtroom before a verdict that's already been decided. Back at home, Shaq stood in front of a mirror longer than usual. His eyes met his own, and what he saw wasn't a legend, wasn't a brand. It was a man out of touch with the streets that had built him. He thought of Lucille again, of how she used to whisper, "If you have more than you need, you better be damn sure someone else is eating too." And then he made a decision. It wouldn't be enough to ask questions. He had to know their story, even if that story didn't want to be found. She didn't see faces, but she recognized kindness. The next few weeks bled into each other like watercolor on wet canvas. Soft lines, quiet mornings, and an unshakable fixation growing in the heart of a man the world considered impossible to shake. Shaq had stood toe-to-toe with the greatest athletes of his time. He'd sat across boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made over a handshake and an espresso. He'd even navigated the unforgiving currents of fame, fatherhood, divorce, and loss. But nothing, not trophies, not money, not the pressure of the spotlight gripped him the way that blind girl and her guardian did. Tuesdays and Fridays, like ritual. Same time, same spot, same routine. Shaq didn't need to remind himself. His body began to move instinctively. He adjusted his schedule, skipped certain meetings, declined appearances, all to make sure he was parked across that worn-down street at exactly 8:15 a.m. The sight of them, though unchanged in practice, altered something inside him each time. He noticed more now. The details, the precision in the man's hands as he broke food into portions small enough for a child but firm enough not to crumble in her grip. He noticed how the girl's head tilted not toward sound but toward presence. She didn't need sight to know where the man was. She could feel him. She didn't reach blindly, she extended her hand with trust, with expectation, always met halfway. There was no one else like them in that neighborhood. The sanitation crew changed regularly. Young workers with headphones, others smoking between shifts, chatting, laughing, and moving on. But this man, he was different. Always clean despite the filth. Always calm despite the stares. He didn't speak much, didn't linger at stops longer than needed, and he never allowed the girl to touch anything sharp, dirty, or uncertain. Every move he made was intentional. The girl Shaq had learned from a bakery clerk that her name might be Naya or Nina, but no one was sure was a mystery of her own. She never wore the same dress twice, yet every outfit looked secondhand. Her shoes were polished but old. Her cane, white with red near the tip, was worn smooth. The way she moved told Shaq she hadn't been blind since birth. There was too much tension in her hands, too much pause in each step, like someone who remembered what seeing once felt like. He tried asking questions, casually at first, at the gas station near the school route, at the corner store where he saw the man buy bottled water, at a barber shop 2 streets over. Everyone gave the same kind of shrug. They come through, quiet folk. No one knows where they live. He don't talk much, just does his job. No idea who the kid belongs to. It was like chasing ghosts. No record, no chatter, no nickname, not even a whisper of gossip, which in a town like this was almost unnatural. That silence was its own answer. Invisibility in plain sight. Shaq started keeping a journal. It sat in the glove compartment of his Escalade, filled with timestamps, observations, street names, small notes, the kind of things detectives did in movies. But he wasn't playing detective. He was searching for something he didn't yet have the words for. One Friday, rain tapped against his windshield like quiet fingers. Still, they came. Naya wore a bright yellow poncho with a tear at the shoulder. The man held an umbrella over her head, not caring that the rest of him was soaked through. They sat under the awning outside the corner shop, eating something wrapped in foil. She laughed once, barely audible over the wind, but it was enough to lift the air around them. Shaq leaned forward, heart clenched. He felt stupid, obsessive. What was he even doing? Stalking 2 strangers on a corner like he had no life? But it wasn't just that. He knew what it was like to be seen but not known. To have people take your image and decide what you were without ever asking. Something about the man and girl screamed that the world had already written them off. That Sunday, Shaq did something he hadn't done in years. He called in a favor from a private investigator named Wallace Haynes, a man who owed him from back in the day. Wallace had worked cases involving athlete blackmail, trademark theft, and contract fraud. This was different. "I just need background," Shaq said. "The man's name. The girl's too, if you can. Nothing shady. Just, I need to know who they are." Wallace didn't ask why. He just took the photos Shaq had snapped from his phone, nodded, and told him to give him a week. In the meantime, Shaq couldn't stop returning. One Tuesday, a white SUV parked across from them. Engine running. 2 teenage boys inside laughed too loudly. They weren't local. Something about the way they stared at the man and the girl felt wrong, predatory. Shaq turned his engine on, ready to intervene if anything shifted, but the man didn't flinch. He placed himself directly between the girl and the street, blocking the view. The SUV drove off eventually, but Shaq's hands stayed clenched on the wheel for 10 more minutes. That night he called his mother. Lucille picked up on the second ring. "You sound tired," she said before he even spoke. "I saw something I can't shake," he replied. "Not something bad, just, I don't know, important." Lucille paused, her silence louder than most words. "Sometimes the spirit shows you things before it tells you why," she finally said. "You stay with it. Whatever it is, stay close to it." Shaq stayed. On Thursday, Wallace called back. His voice wasn't smug like usual. It was low, cautious. "You were right," he said. "There's no record, no legal guardianship, no school enrollment under the name Naya. I ran her description against missing persons. Nothing. The man? Same dead ends. No employee files under sanitation contracts with the county. Facial match software came up empty." Shaq frowned. "So what the hell are they?" "I don't know," Wallace said. "But they're not ghosts. They're hiding. Carefully. Deliberately." Shaq didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he left earlier than usual and waited down the street. When the truck pulled in, he watched from the alleyway. The man stepped out. Naya followed. They sat on the same crate, but something was different. The man's eyes were scanning, nervous, like he knew he was being watched. Shaq hesitated, then stepped out of the shadows and walked toward them. The man stood up, a wall of tension rising between them. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Shaq said, palms open. The man didn't speak. "You're taking care of her," Shaq continued, "better than most parents take care of their own. I want to help." The man's eyes narrowed. "You help with your hands or your mouth?" he asked, voice rough, voice real. Shaq was caught off guard. "Whichever way you need," he answered. The man nodded once, slowly, then he sat back down. Shaq didn't stay. He just walked back to his car and sat inside, breath short. It was the first real exchange they'd had, and even though it told him almost nothing, it told him everything. This man wasn't looking for charity. He wasn't looking to be saved. He was protecting something precious and fragile, and maybe even dangerous to the wrong eyes. And Shaq had just become one of those eyes. But he wasn't turning away. Not now. Sometimes the trash tells the story people try to hide. The morning air was thick with that particular kind of southern heat clinging to your skin before the sun even fully broke over the rooftops. Shaq sat behind the wheel of his Escalade, the tinted windows disguising the tension in his jaw. He wasn't watching from the same distance anymore. Today he was following. Not in the heavy-handed way of a man with a badge, but with the uneasy precision of someone trying to stay invisible. He'd memorized their route by now. Knew which bins they started with, which ones they skipped. He kept a full car length back as the sanitation truck moved from house to house, stopping just long enough to dump bags and return to rhythm. It was mechanical, almost elegant, the man's motions smooth and unfaltering, like he'd been doing this for years. The girl, Naya, stayed on the passenger side, perched inside the cab, her face to the window, chin lifted, as if tasting the air instead of watching it. She didn't move much, but when she did, it was purposeful, a turn of the head when someone shouted too loud, a flinch when brakes screeched. Shaq watched her the way someone watches a song they can't hear, but somehow still feel. The neighborhoods changed gradually, from middle-class comfort to slightly worn brick homes. Lawns turned patchy, porches sagged. That's where it started, the subtle shifts that didn't need explanation. At one corner market, the man stepped inside to grab water. Shaq parked across the street, pretending to check his phone, but his eyes were fixed on what unfolded. The clerk, white, mid-30s, crew cut and a clenched jaw, watched the man like he was tracking a storm. Not a word was spoken. No greeting, no courtesy. The clerk kept one hand near the register, the other loosely by his hip, where Shaq was sure a panic button lived. The man placed 2 waters on the counter. Waited. The silence was louder than traffic. The clerk scanned the bottles, then stared at the man without making eye contact. Not a thank you. Not a have a nice day. Just a receipt slid across the counter like a warning. Shaq gritted his teeth. He drove on. At a nearby park, 2 security guards circled their vehicle twice. Shaq watched as one of them leaned near the open passenger window, pretending to check something, then backed off when the man's voice, low but firm, clearly said something that made the guard pause. The girl didn't flinch. The man never raised his tone. But the threat had been understood. They were being followed, watched, picked apart. It was never overt, never explosive. That's what made it worse. It was the kind of racism that dripped instead of struck. Insidious, slippery, coated in fake laws and polite refusals. Shaq thought about his own past, how even at the height of his fame, he was followed in high-end stores, asked for ID at gated events he was headlining, and warned not to wear hoodies in certain zip codes. But he'd buried that, replaced it with wealth, with visibility. He hadn't experienced this kind of suffocation in years. Watching that man endure it with quiet resolve was like being reintroduced to an old scar he thought had healed. At one stop, the man found a torn garbage bag filled with empty food tins, expired medication boxes, and broken toys. Most sanitation workers would have just dumped it, but he paused, scanning it like a code. Then Shaq saw it, a sealed white envelope poking from beneath a dented cereal box. The man didn't take it. He buried it deeper, but Shaq's eyes had caught it. After the truck pulled off, Shaq waited until they turned the corner. Then he walked to the bin. His 7-foot frame made him look out of place in this alley of peeling fences and cracked pavement, but he didn't care. He reached in and retrieved the envelope. It was smudged with coffee grounds and oil, but still legible. The name on the front made his stomach knot. His hands trembled as he slid the papers out. Inside were partial hospital documents, court filing codes, and a form referencing temporary custody placement. Most of the pages were burned at the edges, as if someone had tried to destroy them but stopped halfway. The handwriting on the margin read, "Do not file, hold, pending juvenile review." Shaq shoved it into his glove compartment. His mind reeled. He didn't know what it meant. Not fully, but he knew what it felt like. Evidence, something buried. A red flag no one wanted raised. He thought back to the investigators' findings. No school records, no birth certificate trace. The man had no digital footprint. They weren't invisible by accident. They were running from something. Later that day, Shaq returned to the route. This time, he stepped out of his car and approached directly. No hesitation, no pretense. The man was just finishing up near a mechanic's garage. "You mind if I ask you something?" Shaq called out. The man turned, face unreadable. "You're protecting her. I respect that. But I need to know, what are you protecting her from?" The man stared at him, expression unreadable, eyes shaded beneath a weather-worn cap.
"You don't need to know nothing," he said calmly. "Not unless you plan to make it worse."
"I'm not here to make it worse," Shaq said, voice low, steady. "I'm here because I can't look away anymore." The man didn't move. "She ain't yours, is she?" Shaq continued. "You're watching over her, but it ain't by law, it's by choice." That broke the silence. The man's jaw flexed. Choice is a word you get when the world gives you options. he said. "We ain't got that luxury. You got power, fame, eyes on you. That girl? She don't need more eyes. She needs a shadow she can trust." Shaq took a step back. He hadn't expected that answer. "I could help," he offered. "Lawyers, shelter, money." The man turned away, lifting the next trash bin. "We don't need charity. We need distance." Shaq stood there for a long moment, then quietly walked away. Back in his car, he stared at the steering wheel, breathing slow. This wasn't just about poverty. This wasn't about some child needing school supplies or a coat. This was about survival in the cracks of a system that wanted to pretend they didn't exist. He thought about the envelope again, the burnt edges, the sealed codes. He wasn't going to sleep until he found out what happened to that girl's mother. That night, he opened up the documents again, sat down in his office under the light of a single desk lamp. He cross-referenced case codes with the juvenile court system, logged into private legal databases, called Wallace. "What you're digging into," Wallace said after an hour, "ain't clean. You sure about this?" Shaq stared at the child's name on the paper. "I'm sure," he answered. By morning, he'd have names. By the end of the week, he'd uncover secrets no one wanted aired. But for now, he looked out the window of his mansion, golden light spilling across the lawn, and thought about how something as small as a sandwich, shared between two ghosts, had pulled him into a truth no one had ever dared feed him. What Shaq finds in the trash changes everything. Shaq had seen a lot of things in his lifetime. Broken contracts, broken bones, broken promises. But nothing ever sat in his gut, like the weight of that crumpled, half-burned envelope, now spread across his desk like a map to some place no one was supposed to go. The room was quiet. No sports talk shows humming from the mounted TV. No assistant hovering by the door. Just the rustle of paper and the slow thump of his heart reminding him this wasn't about business anymore. The top sheet bore the name Nia L. Green. Her age, 9. Date of birth, May 14th. There was a reference number scrawled in the upper right corner, marked with a black stamp that read "Temp hold, no distribution." Below it, in faded ink, was a medical assessment. Neurological trauma, optical nerve damage, cause listed as impact injury. There was no mention of how it happened, no accident report, no attending physician's name, just 2 words scratched in pen near the margin: protective custody. Shaq leaned back, running a hand down his face. This wasn't something you found in regular garbage. This was intentional. This was someone trying to erase someone else, and not quite finishing the job. He picked up his phone and called Wallace Haynes again, the same PI he'd used before, the same guy who owed him years of silence. Wallace didn't like cases like this, too gray, too deep. But when Shaq laid out what he'd found, Wallace's breath caught mid-call. "This ain't street-level dirty, man," Wallace said. "This is institutional filth. You sure you want me poking around?" Shaq looked at the file again, focusing on a sealed court order, with the code BG-AV116F, a judge's signature, illegible, and a box marked "Closed to public inquiry."
"I don't want poking," he said. "I want the truth, and I want it fast."
Wallace hesitated. "You realize if this is sealed, anyone who uncovers it without court approval stepping over the line? I ain't worried about lines anymore." 3 days passed in a haze. Shaq still went to the mansion gym, still made appearances at board meetings via Zoom, but his mind was elsewhere. His nights were longer now, filled with Google searches that led nowhere, with sleepless wandering through halls that echoed too much. He stopped watching the sanitation route for a while, stopped trying to make small talk. He knew now that what he was in the middle of wasn't just about a man and a blind girl. This was about a crime. On the 4th morning, Wallace called again. His voice was lower, thinner, like he was already looking over his shoulder. "Shaq," he said, "this thing's got teeth. Talk to me." Case BG-116F was filed 3 years ago in Fulton County Juvenile Court, sealed under a protective minor status. Mother Naomi Green, father unknown. Girl was taken into custody after the mother died during a detainment in county jail. Shaq froze. Detained for what? Wallace exhaled. Initial charge was obstruction and resisting arrest. No prior record. Video footage never released. Death ruled accidental trauma during restraint. No officer charged. Custody automatically shifted to state. Shaq leaned forward, every nerve on edge. And the girl was placed in a private foster care facility, contracted through the state. But here's where it gets weird. 6 months later, she disappeared from their database. Not reported missing, not transferred, just vanished. On paper, she doesn't exist anymore. No further documentation. "What about the guy?" Shaq asked. "The sanitation worker?" Wallace paused. Name's Reuben Slate. Former civil rights attorney. Defended Naomi Green during several housing discrimination lawsuits before her arrest. Lost his license 2 years ago. Disbarred for contempt in a federal case. Some say it was a setup. He disappeared from public life after that. No known address. No family. No employment record. Until he pops up hauling trash for a third-party city contract 6 months ago. Under an alias. No social. Shaq's head dropped. It all clicked in his mind like thunder behind his ribs. Reuben wasn't her father. He was her protector. Her mother's last connection to justice. The man who watched the state take everything and decided to take her back. I think he stole her, Wallace said quietly. No, Shaq replied, eyes burning. He saved her. That afternoon, Shaq drove to a part of the city he hadn't visited in over a decade. Not since his charity tour, back when cameras followed him through donation drives and holiday meals. Back then, the streets still had hope, still believed celebrities could mean change. Now, they just looked tired, burned-out buildings, stores with metal grates locked even in the daytime, a place forgotten by progress. He found Reuben's truck parked behind an abandoned laundromat, its side scratched and the paint faded. Shaq parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot. The truck was empty, but he waited. 10 minutes later, Reuben rounded the corner with Naya holding his forearm. Her cane tapped gently along the ground. They walked together like shadows, quiet, connected, invisible to the rest of the world. Shaq stepped out from the alley. We need to talk, he said firmly. Reuben paused. His eyes flicked up, guarded. You still following us? I found your file, Shaq said. The one you tried to burn. That made Reuben stop. Fully stop. His jaw clenched. Naya leaned into his side, sensing the shift in air. I'm not here to threaten you, Shaq said. I want to help, but you need to let me in. Reuben studied him. It wasn't suspicion. It was calculation. The kind of stare that asked, what's your angle, and how deep are you willing to go? Shaq stepped forward, voice low. I know who you are. I know what happened to her mom. I know the system buried it. I know you've been hiding her ever since. But this thing, it's bigger than the both of you now. Bigger than me. There's no safety in silence anymore. Reuben looked down at Naya, who tilted her head toward the sound of Shaq's voice. Her hand slipped into Reuben's coat pocket, gripping something unseen. You can't protect her in shadows, Shaq continued. Not forever. They're gonna come looking. And next time, they won't leave evidence behind. Reuben's jaw finally loosened. His voice came out cracked but firm. She's the last piece of Naomi left. They erased her mother, and they'll erase her too if they find out she's alive. You think cameras and influence can stop that? Shaq nodded slowly. Not alone. But with truth? Maybe. Reuben hesitated for a long time. Then quietly he said, You ever ask why she's blind? Shaq frowned. 2 days after Naomi's arrest, Naya was hospitalized. Facial bruising, ocular damage, blunt force trauma consistent with restraint. But they filed it under unknown fall. She told me, later after the nightmares, that she remembers a flashlight, a hand, screaming, and then nothing. Shaq swallowed hard. The knot in his chest twisted like a vice. Reuben looked away, his voice a whisper now. They didn't just take her mother. They broke her world. And now I'm the only thing between her and the same damn system that made her disappear. Shaq didn't speak for a long while. There was nothing that would fill the space. But in that silence, something changed. Reuben reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded page, weathered, torn at the edges. He held it out. Shaq took it, unfolded it. It was a birth certificate. Naya L. Green, mother Naomi Green, father, listed as unknown. In the bottom margin was a scribbled name, witness at birth, Reuben A. Slate. I was there when she was born, Reuben said. I held her before her mother did. That makes her mine, even if no paper says so. Shaq nodded. Then let's make sure they don't erase her twice. They didn't shake hands. No one made promises. But in that cracked alley, under a buzzing street lamp that hadn't been repaired in years, something unspoken passed between them. A pact. A plan. And the quiet beginning of a storm that would rattle every courthouse file cabinet from Georgia to D.C. Justice is easy to speak of, harder to recognize when buried alive. The name echoed in Shaq's mind like a courtroom gavel dropped on concrete. Reuben Slate. It wasn't unfamiliar. Somewhere in the back of his memory, it rang a bell not from television or social media, but from old headlines that never made it to primetime news. The kind tucked into the back pages of newspapers or buried beneath more digestible scandals. It didn't take long for the puzzle pieces to surface. Reuben Slate wasn't just a sanitation worker. He was a former legal powerhouse, A man who once stood in front of federal benches and stared down systems designed to stay unchallenged. Shaq's first real dive into Rubin's past began not in a courtroom but on the second floor of his own home library, where dusty binders full of civil rights case studies and nonprofit research sat untouched for years. Shaq had donated to justice orgs, sat on advisory boards, but he'd never once looked this closely at the names inside the lawsuits he supported. Until now. There it was. Reuben A. Slate v. Georgia Department of Housing, 2011. Slate and Jennings v. Atlanta PD Internal Affairs Division, 2012. State of Georgia v. Naomi Green, 2017. The deeper Shaq read, the heavier his chest became. Reuben hadn't just taken controversial cases. He had made a name confronting the kind of cases others avoided like fire. Tenants wrongfully evicted from government housing. Black teenagers beaten by off-duty cops and then charged with assault. Mothers like Naomi Green accused of child neglect for leaving kids in apartments while they worked 2 minimum-wage jobs overnight. Reuben Slate didn't whisper into the system. He shouted. And the system shouted back. One article in particular hit Shaq like a punch to the ribs. It was from an old independent blog site, long defunct, still accessible through a cached archive Wallace had sent him. The article's title: Reuben Slate disbarred after courtroom clash. Justice or retaliation? The piece described how Reuben had challenged a judge's decision to remove child testimony from a case involving a corrupt foster care home. During closing arguments, Reuben refused to sit down after repeated orders. He cited the Civil Rights Act, quoted constitutional law, even read aloud a statement from the child that had been sealed. He was held in contempt, fined, and later referred to the bar for conduct unbecoming. A formal review board, made up of former prosecutors and state-appointed advisors, had stripped his license 6 months later. The disbarment wasn't the fall, it was the burial. Shaq sat back from his desk, rubbing the tension from his eyes. This wasn't just about Naya. This was about a man whose whole identity had been erased because he wouldn't play the game. He picked up the phone, called Wallace again. "I need more on Reuben," he said. "Not just court records. I want interviews. Colleagues, enemies, anybody who ever stood across from him." Wallace hesitated. "This isn't a documentary, Shaq." "No," Shaq replied. "It's a resurrection." 2 days later, Shaq stood outside an old bookstore on Auburn Avenue, a black-owned spot called Langston's Corner. Inside, he met a woman named Elise Monroe, former co-counsel to Slate before the disbarment. Elise was sharp, in her early 60s, and carried herself with the posture of someone who had never bowed to anything but truth. "Reuben never played safe," she told him, thumbing through a file of yellowed news clippings. "He didn't do deals, didn't play politics. He walked into those courts like he was bringing the ancestors with him. Why'd he stop?" "They didn't just take his license," she said. "They took his cases, froze his accounts, and leaked false claims to media outlets. Said he coerced testimony, said he faked evidence. All false, all dropped, but damage done." She leaned in. "You ever been punished for being right too early, Mr. O'Neill?" Shaq didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was an answer on its own. Back in the Escalade, the drive felt longer than usual. Reuben's story was now threading itself with Naya's, and the picture was becoming grotesquely clear. Naomi Green had trusted Reuben. He defended her until the system snapped back. Then they buried her, first in charges, then in silence. When she died, Reuben disappeared too, but not because he ran, because he knew no one else would protect the girl she left behind. Shaq thought about that, about all the times he'd shown up for the cameras but not the courts, about the awards he'd won for community impact, while men like Reuben were erased. He felt ashamed, but more than that, he felt responsible. The next morning, Shaq showed up unannounced. Same corner, same hour. Reuben and Naya were finishing up their sandwich, sitting beneath a tree with browning leaves that whispered against the wind. Shaq didn't wait for permission. He sat down on the curb across from them. "I know who you are now," he said. Reuben looked at him, unimpressed. "And that changes what?" Shaq took a breath. "It changes what I'm willing to do." Naya tilted her head, listening. Her hands, folded in her lap, slowly relaxed. "You were right about me," Shaq said. "I've had power a long time, but I've never really used it. Not like you have. Not where it matters most. But that ends now. You're not alone anymore." Reuben's jaw tightened. "You think this is about getting press? About building a platform? You don't understand what they'll do if this goes public." Shaq leaned forward. "Maybe I don't, but I understand what happens if we stay quiet." The silence that followed wasn't antagonistic. It was heavy with shared fatigue. "You plan to fix a rigged machine?" Reuben finally asked. "No," Shaq said. I plan to break the damn thing and build something new. Reuben didn't nod, didn't agree, but he didn't get up and leave either. Later that night, Shaq met with his legal team and laid out everything. This isn't about litigation, he said. This is exposure. I want every sealed case Naomi Green was ever involved in pulled up, every internal affairs review, every piece of this foster care pipeline tracked. And I want it done quietly. If even one name leaks before I say so, we shut it down. They looked at him like he'd grown another head.
You're talking about opening a war, one of his attorneys said.
Shaq's reply was simple. Then we fight. He also made another call, this time to a woman named Clarice Vaughn, a journalist who ran an independent investigative outlet online. She'd once been blacklisted by major networks for running a story on illegal detainment of minors by off-duty deputies. Shaq had donated to her fund 5 years ago. Now he needed her voice. I've got a story, he told her, and if you're willing, I want to fund you to tell it. What's it about, she asked. Ghosts, he said. And what happens when we stop pretending they're not still haunting every courtroom and classroom in this country? Clarice was quiet for a moment, then said, send me everything. Within 48 hours, Clarice had filed a Freedom of Information request, tapped into whistleblower databases, and opened a digital tip line for any former state workers connected to Naomi Green's custody case. Reuben, meanwhile, continued working his sanitation route. Shaq offered to buy him out of the job, offered him a place on his foundation's board, private security, even a trust fund for Naya. Reuben declined it all. She needs to know what real is, he said, not a life locked behind gates. I'm not ashamed of the streets, I'm ashamed of what they did to hers. Shaq understood. It wasn't about pride, it was about purpose. But Naya? She started to open up. One afternoon, as Shaq drove her and Reuben to a safe house on the outskirts of town, she spoke to him from the back seat. I remember my mama's voice, she said softly. She used to hum when she cooked. Real soft, like a whisper. Reuben hums like that sometimes too. Shaq glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her leaning against the window, sightless but full of something he hadn't expected, hope. I think that means she's still near, she added. He didn't reply, he just nodded, the knot in his throat too tight to unravel. They were moving now. Slowly, quietly, but surely. Reuben had spent years buried by the system, Naya nearly erased, and Shaq lost in his own silence. But ghosts don't stay quiet forever. And now they had found their voice. He brought them into his world, but it didn't want them. The gates opened with a smooth electric hum. Slow, deliberate, like everything in Shaq's world was programmed to move without friction. The lawn beyond stretched wide and green, cut so precisely it looked artificial. The flowers imported, the fountains choreographed. This was the world Shaq had built with money, and with money came insulation, or so he had believed. Reuben and Naya stood at the threshold of that world with quiet uncertainty. Naya clutched her cane lightly in one hand, her other hand hovering near Reuben's hip. She tilted her head toward the open air, as if tasting the space. Reuben looked forward, eyes scanning the mansion, the long driveway, the white stone facade that gleamed too perfectly in the morning sun.
This some kind of museum? He asked flatly.
No, Shaq replied, motioning them forward. It's just home. They didn't move immediately. The air was too quiet. The silence wasn't peace, it was pressure. Shaq understood. There was no traffic here. No kids shouting on sidewalks. Just hedges trimmed to military symmetry, and homes with columns that looked like they were built more for photographs than people. They walked in together. Inside, Shaq showed them the guest wing. 2 rooms with king-size beds, private bathrooms, views of a lake that looked like it belonged in a screensaver. He offered everything without fanfare. A stocked fridge, clean clothes, security code access. Reuben nodded but didn't thank him. Gratitude felt premature in a place like this. Naya wandered slowly through the hallway, her fingers brushing the walls, her steps cautious but unafraid. You smell that? She asked, half whispering. Reuben looked down. What?
Clean, real clean, like nobody ever spills nothing.
Shaq stood in the doorway, hearing every word. Later that afternoon, the first complaint came in. A neighbor texted Shaq directly, some retired finance executive whose house sat 3 driveways down. Hey man, everything all right over there? Saw a guy unloading a trash bag from a beat-up truck into your garage. Looked odd? Shaq didn't answer. He didn't need to. An hour later, the community HOA sent an official email. Subject line, Security Concern and Resident Standards. The message was formal but barbed. It referenced unfamiliar individuals, non-compliant vehicle models, and a clause from the community charter regarding unauthorized guests of extended duration. Reuben had parked his work truck behind Shaq's 3-car garage, near the garden shed. Naya had spent the morning sitting on the back deck, listening to birds and whispering songs to herself. They hadn't done anything. Still, the walls were already closing in. Shaq forwarded the email to his lawyer, then walked out to find Reuben kneeling near the edge of the lawn, pulling weeds from a flower bed. "You don't have to do that," Shaq said. Reuben didn't look up. "I know." "Then why are you?" Reuben shrugged. "A man cleans where he stays." Shaq didn't argue. He understood, too well. That evening, 2 private security guards patrolled the cul-de-sac. They were new. Shaq had never seen them before. He watched from the upstairs window as they slowed in front of his property, one pointing toward the side yard, the other jotting something down. The next day, a letter arrived, hand-delivered, printed on heavy stationery. "We request an urgent meeting to discuss recent disturbances and the preservation of community image." Shaq called the number on the letter and told them he wasn't available ever. But the message was clear. This world, his world, didn't want Reuben and Naya in it. Not even with all the gates and grass and marble entryways he had paid for. Not with all his celebrity. Not with all his donations to local police and schools. The second he brought the truth into the space rejected it. Later that week, Naya sat by the lake, knees pulled to her chest. Shaq joined her, sitting cross-legged on the lawn beside her, feeling the damp grass soak through his jeans. The lake was silent, rippling gently under a breeze, too delicate to disturb anything important. "Is it always this quiet?" Naya asked. "Most days," he answered.
It's scary.
"Why?" She paused. "Feels like if I scream, nobody would hear me." Shaq didn't know what to say to that. Because she was right. Silence in neighborhoods like this wasn't safety. It was sedation. It was how the truth got erased. Quietly, politely, without ever raising its voice. Back inside, Reuben stood near the sliding doors, arms folded, watching the horizon like a man waiting for a storm he'd already survived once. "They want us out," he said. "They want you invisible," Shaq corrected. "They don't mind you being alive, just not seen, not where it makes them ask questions." Reuben nodded. "You gonna let them push?" "No," Shaq said. "I'm gonna push back." That evening, Shaq recorded a short video on his phone. Just his voice. No background, no lighting, no script. He spoke about Reuben, about Naya, about Naomi Green, about what happens when power pretends justice is about paperwork. He didn't post it right away. Instead, he sent it privately, to a few key people. Journalists, activists, a judge he trusted, a senator he used to play pickup ball with on weekends. People who could watch and listen without the pressure of a trending hashtag. The reaction was immediate. Most were cautious. A few offered quiet support. But one call came from a local news editor. "If you run with this, Shaq, you're going to piss off people who write checks, not just laws. Be sure." Shaq responded without hesitation. "I'm sure." Meanwhile, Reuben stayed low. He declined to join any public conversation. Mia stayed inside for the next 2 days after someone posted a photo of her near the lake on a neighborhood Facebook page with the caption, "Who's watching this child?" That photo had over 300 comments by noon. Shaq shut down the thread, threatened lawsuits. But the damage was done. Not to his brand, not to his net worth, but to the idea that his home, his empire, could shelter truth without consequence. On the 3rd day, Lucille came by. Shaq's mother walked through the front door with a grocery bag and a storm behind her eyes. She didn't need an invitation. She never had. "I saw the posts," she said. "Saw the HOA nonsense." Shaq nodded. She put the bag down, pulled out a loaf of bread, then looked him dead in the eye. "Let me ask you something. You built this house, right? Every inch. Paid cash." "Damn right. So why does it still belong to them?" Shaq didn't answer. Lucille tapped her temple. "Because you've been living like you owe them something. Like you borrowed space. But baby, you didn't. You earned it. Now act like it." He nodded slowly. "I'm trying." "Don't try," she said. "Do." That night, he walked out onto his own front lawn, barefoot, in sweatpants and a t-shirt, while security circled the block again. He waved them down. "You got business here?" he asked. The younger one flinched, startled. "We were told to monitor." "Told by who?" The man didn't answer. Shaq smiled. "This is my address, my property. Don't come back unless I call." They left. Inside, Reuben watched the whole thing through the blinds, expression unreadable. "You really think standing on grass and flexing title deeds is enough?" he asked. "No," Shaq said. But it's a start. They both knew the fight was bigger than fences and neighborhood complaints. But in a world that valued white lawns over black truth, even standing on your own grass could be a radical act. The greatest threat to power isn't a bullet. It's a memory that won't die. There were no mirrors in Shaq's hallway that showed who he used to be. Every one of them was framed in gold or brushed steel, pristine reflections that bounced light off flawless paint and crown molding. But that night, as he stood in his walk-in closet surrounded by designer suits and the soundproof hum of silence, the mirror he stared into didn't reflect a legend. It showed a man cracking at the edges, slowly realizing how long he'd been sleeping inside privilege disguised as comfort. Lucille stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. She wasn't one for pretense, never had been. Not even when Shaq bought her that house in Orlando. Not when the money came pouring in. Not when she became the mother of a global brand. You look like somebody who just figured out the roof over his head was never built for a storm, she said. Shaq didn't turn. I used to think if you made it out, you owed it to yourself to enjoy peace. Lucille stepped in, her footsteps soft but sharp with purpose. Ain't nothing wrong with peace, but you better be damn sure it don't come at the cost of someone else's war. He finally looked at her, eyes heavy. I didn't see it, Ma. I mean, I saw it, growing up. You struggling to pay rent, to feed us. I just thought the fight was to escape it. Lucille smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was the kind of smile that held old pain like folded laundry. You were supposed to escape, but you weren't supposed to forget. Shaq sat on the bench at the center of the closet. It's different now. I'm not just watching. Reuben, that little girl. This whole thing. They pulled something out of me. I thought I'd buried. Lucille knelt in front of him, her hands resting on his knees. Baby, you didn't bury it. You just got used to walking around with it sealed up. Now it's leaking, and that's good. That's how you know it's still alive. The conversation lingered in the air, even after she left the room. That night, Shaq walked through the mansion like a stranger in his own life. The grand piano no one played. The basketball memorabilia that had become more shrine than inspiration. The imported art that held no memory. No message, just price tags. It all felt like set dressing for a version of him that didn't exist anymore. The next morning, he drove to his childhood neighborhood without security, without assistance. Just him and the hum of thoughts pressing into his chest. The streets hadn't changed much. The potholes were still there. The same corner store, same kids on rusted bikes, same scent of fried chicken and exhaust. But what struck him wasn't the decay, it was the familiarity. Like his bones recognized the place even when his bank account didn't. He parked outside the building where he'd grown up. 2 stories, paint peeling, balconies barely holding on. The door buzzers were broken. A handwritten sign was taped to the door. No soliciting, no lying, no cops. He smiled faintly at that. On impulse, he knocked on the door of Unit 2B, the same one Lucille used to work 2 jobs to keep. An older woman cracked the door, headscarf, robe, cigarette burning. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing him. He gestured awkwardly. "I used to live here, back in the 80s. Name's Shaquille." She looked him up and down. "Big Shaq?" "Yeah," he laughed, "the one and only." She grinned. "Boy, get in here, I got questions." Inside, the place smelled the same. Lemon pine sol and stovetop grease. He sat at the tiny kitchen table, while she poured coffee without asking. Her name was Mavis. She'd lived there for 15 years, had 3 grandkids, took care of her neighbor's daughter after school. When he asked her about the neighborhood, about how things were now, her smile thinned. "Ain't much changed. Still got police cruising like it's a zoo. Still got landlords raising rent faster than paychecks. And if you poor and black, Lord, you better pray your baby don't get sick or smart. One's a death sentence and the other's a threat." Shaq nodded slowly. "You ever hear the name Naomi Green?" She paused. "That the girl who went blind after her mama died in lockup?" His stomach turned. "You remember that?" "Everyone here remembers. Cops came and cleaned up the story like it was spilled milk. Told folks she got aggressive in jail. But her sister said she'd never even yelled in public." Shaq left Mavis with a handshake and a promise to return. On the drive back, his mind churned. Naomi's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a thread. And every thread he pulled led to something dirtier, something older. This wasn't just one story, it was all of them. He called Clarice Vaughn next. "I want to make this bigger," he said. "Not just an article, a full expose." Clarice didn't hesitate. "Then we need survivors. Whistleblowers. Someone who saw the cover-ups and lived to talk about it." Shaq paused. "You're not scared?" She laughed. "I'm always scared. That's why I move carefully." He hung up and opened his laptop. For hours, he read through court records, pulled up databases, paid for archives. Every document, every statement, every sealed file started to paint the picture he couldn't ignore anymore. There was a pattern. Black mothers in low-income housing charged for child neglect over minor incidents. Kids moved into state care, foster homes with histories of abuse swept under the rug. Internal affairs reports edited down to one-paragraph summaries. Judges who sealed hearings for the child's safety. Lawyers who were threatened, silenced, or removed. And there, like a name scratched into concrete, was Reuben Slate. Again and again. By nightfall, Shaq stood in front of his living room window, staring out at the lawn that had once symbolized freedom. Now it looked like a stage, and he was finally ready to pull the curtain back. Lucille joined him, holding a folder. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said. He opened it. Inside were photocopies from her youth. A complaint she filed in 1975 against a police officer who shoved her outside a corner store. Her handwritten statement. A rejection letter from Internal Affairs. A newspaper article with her name redacted but the story unmistakable. "You never told me," he whispered. "You were a boy," she said. "Didn't need to carry that yet." Shaq flipped through the pages, his throat tight. "You think this is ever gonna change?" he asked. Lucille looked him in the eyes. "Change don't come from comfort. It comes from discomfort that refuses to sit still." The next morning, Shaq called a meeting with his foundation's board. When they joined the call, expecting status updates and corporate partnerships, he dropped something unexpected on the screen, a slideshow of faces. Naomi Green, Naya, Reuben, 3 other mothers from Fulton County. Names, dates, case numbers. "This is what we're doing now," he said. "Not basketball camps, not food drives. We're funding exposure. We're building legal defense funds for the people buried by silence, and we're putting cameras where they never want cameras." The room was dead quiet. One board member, a cautious investment strategist, finally asked, "Won't this put your other partnerships at risk?" Shaq stared straight at the screen. Then they were never partnerships. They were leases. That night, as Reuben stood by the lake, skipping stones, Shaq joined him. "You still sure you want this fight?" Reuben asked. Shaq nodded. "It's not a fight anymore. It's a reckoning." They stood together in the dark, the mansion behind them, the system ahead, and the past in their hands like broken mirrors that still cut deep. But now they knew where to aim the reflection. The media thrives on tragedy, but silence is its deadliest trick. Shaq had always believed that with enough light, darkness didn't stand a chance. That if you exposed the truth, raw, honest, unfiltered, the world would have no choice but to act. So when he gathered every document, every sealed case file, every name, date, and connection, he assumed the media would be waiting with open arms. They weren't. The first email was short and polite. "Thanks for sharing, Shaquille. While this is important, it's a bit outside our editorial scope. Best of luck." The second was even colder. "We appreciate your passion. Unfortunately, without formal confirmation from the state or court, we can't move forward. Our legal team advised against it." By the 5th rejection, he stopped reading. It wasn't just skepticism, it was strategy. They weren't doubting the truth, they were avoiding it. And it wasn't hard to see why. The documents included redacted records from child welfare agencies, closed-door custody rulings, an unreleased death report, the names of 2 former judges, a senator's campaign donor, who owned a chain of group homes. Shaq had thought truth would be enough. He called Clarice Vaughn, hoping the independent journalist might have better luck. She listened quietly, then sighed through the receiver. "They're circling the wagons, Shaq," she said. "Once the gatekeepers sense exposure, they don't block the facts, they starve the oxygen. So what do? We publish anyway, but not through them." Shaq's next move was instinct. He picked up his phone and called someone from his past, Andre Wexler. They'd played AAU together back in Newark. Andre had gone the media route, climbed his way into the executive floor of a major cable network. They hadn't spoken in years, but Shaq knew if anyone could give it to him straight, it was Dre. Andre answered after 2 rings.
"Big Shaq, been a minute."
"I need 10 minutes, Shaq said. "Serious. I'm sending you a file. Read it, then tell me if your network will run it." An hour later, Andre called back. No small talk. "You trying to start a war, man?"
"I'm trying to stop one that's already killing kids."
Andre exhaled. "Look, the story's real, the research is solid, but this ain't about truth. It's about fallout. You name names in that piece. Judges, state workers, contractors. You think they'll let you burn that house down on live TV? They're already burning real lives in silence." Andre's voice dropped. "Shaq, listen to me. You're untouchable. You've built a brand no one can touch. But she's not. That little girl? You go public with this, and every skeleton in her past will be dragged out. They'll leak things, twist things. If she's even legally dead on paper, they'll make her an illegal liability. You understand? Shaq clenched his jaw. You're saying back off. I'm saying don't be naive. They'll protect the system before they ever protect a child. The call ended in silence. That night, Shaq sat outside on his back patio while Ruben paced the edge of the yard like a sentry. Naya was asleep inside, tucked under a weighted blanket, one hand resting on the soft nose of a stuffed bear Shaq had custom-made in her mother's memory. When Ruben returned to the patio, Shaq didn't speak right away, just sipped his drink, watching the moon flicker in the lake's reflection. They won't run it, he finally said. Too much risk, too many names. Ruben didn't flinch. Then we do it without him. Shaq nodded. Clarice wants to publish it through her own platform, but we'd be on our own. No backing, no protection. Ruben looked out over the water. You think I've had protection this whole time? The silence sat between them like a mirror. Shaq stood and walked back inside. He looked at Naya for a long time, the way her body curled inward, the way her breathing caught on every fourth inhale like she still carried nightmares. He made up his mind. The next morning, Clarice began uploading the full investigative piece. Photos, documents, timelines, testimony. They titled it, Erased in Custody, The Forgotten Case of Naya Green. The opening paragraph was simple. This is the story of a child the state declared invisible. It is also the story of the man who tried to save her, and the system that punished them both. It went live at 7:04 a.m. By 9:00 a.m. the website was down, hacked, flooded with spam traffic. Clarice's phone crashed from too many incoming calls. Her server host emailed her a single sentence. Your site has become a liability. By noon, Shaq's personal legal team received a cease and desist from a law firm representing the Georgia Department of Child and Family Services. The language was technical, but the message was clear. Retract, or we retaliate. That night, someone posted a blurry photo of Naya online, a screenshot from years ago, taken during her time in state custody. The caption read, Foster girl gone missing? Why is she with Shaquille O'Neal? Within hours, a storm of trolls and fake accounts flooded social media. The narrative shifted fast. Why is a millionaire hiding a child? Is this a publicity stunt? Ex-lawyer kidnaps state ward, basketball star helps cover it up? The machine had begun its spin. Shaq sat in his home office, screens buzzing with chaos. He scrolled through headlines, none of which reflected truth. Lucille came in, holding a warm mug of tea. She didn't speak, just placed it beside him. I tried to do it right, Shaq muttered. Right don't mean easy, Lucille said, especially not when the wrong side's got a louder mic. He looked up at her. They're going after her now. Not just Ruben, not just me, her. Lucille sat beside him. They always go after the innocent first. It's how cowards defend power. He turned off the monitors. Then I need to give her something stronger than silence. The next day, he recorded a new video. This time, no filters, no edits. Just his face, serious and steady. He told the world everything, from the envelope in the trash to the blackout in the press rooms. He named names, showed documents, told the story as plainly as it deserved to be told. He didn't ask for shares, didn't ask for hashtags. He asked for conscience. The video went viral within minutes, not because of shock, but because of who he was. The legend, speaking not as a celebrity, but as a man who finally saw the truth too clearly to stay quiet. But with the attention came escalation. 2 men in suits appeared at the front gate that evening, presenting state IDs. They didn't ask to come in. They informed his staff they were beginning a formal inquiry into harboring a protected minor. Ruben refused to let them speak to Naya. Shaq told them flatly, "You're not stepping 1 foot into this house without a warrant." They left but left a chill in the air. At dinner, Naya sat quietly, pushed food around her plate. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. Shaq leaned in gently. "No, baby, they did." She nodded once, but her eyes, though blind, were full of knowing. "They don't want people like me to be real, do they?" "No," Shaq said. "They don't. But you are. And now the world knows it too." That night, outside his mansion, news vans parked quietly. Not one anchor stepped out. No one rang the bell. They were waiting, watching, not to report, but to react. Inside, Shaq made a vow. He wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when the cost of silence had already reached the feet of a child who had done nothing but survive. Because in a world that fed off tragedy for ratings, the real threat wasn't chaos. It was the kind of truth you couldn't bury with spin. And Nia Green had become that truth. Even under the sun, some things stay in the dark by design. The day started with light, warm, golden light spilling over the hedges, dancing across Shaq's driveway as if nothing was wrong in the world. Nia walked toward the car, backpack snug against her shoulders, white cane tapping confidently against stone. Shaq had arranged for a private driver to take her to a special art school 2 towns over, one that catered to students with visual impairment and creative ambition. He wanted her to feel normal again, human, safe. But shadows don't wait for night. Shaq noticed at first a black Chevy Malibu parked across the street. No city sticker, windows tinted darker than regulation. The same car had been spotted 3 days in a row, idling longer than any casual observer would. He didn't panic, not at first. He just took a photo of the plates and sent it to Wallace with a note. Find out who this is. By noon, Wallace responded. Vehicles registered to a shell company. No ownership history, common for law enforcement surveillance. Or worse, private contractors. The implication hit like a cold wind. Shaq called the school immediately. Nia had arrived. She was fine, nothing unusual. Still, he told the staff to keep her inside until the driver returned, and he sent a second car just in case. Later that afternoon, Ruben didn't return home. Shaq waited until dusk. Called twice. No answer. By 8, a text came in from an unfamiliar number. I'm at City Precinct 3. Tell Nia I'm okay. Don't bring her here. Shaq didn't hesitate. He drove himself straight to the station, bypassing his usual driver. No security, just fury. Inside, the desk sergeant looked up from her screen with a trained indifference. I'm here for Ruben Slate, Shaq said. The woman blinked, then smirked. Don't have anyone in our system by that name. Shaq leaned on the counter. Try again. 5 minutes later, another officer emerged. Older, tall, suit and tie type with a practiced calm. Mr. O'Neill, he said smoothly. Your friend is being held on an administrative parking infraction. Not formally booked, just detained pending paperwork. Since when does a parking violation get a man locked in a cell? Shaq asked. The officer smiled. Depends on the neighborhood. Shaq didn't smile back. I'm posting bond. There's no bond to post. Then release him. The officer's voice dropped a notch. He's being held under a local ordinance for vehicle abandonment. Shaq stared. That truck has his name on the contract. He works sanitation. He's got a route badge. Badge is expired. Because they shut down the contract this morning. Shaq snapped. Convenient, huh? The officer shrugged. Policy's policy. Shaq didn't yell. He didn't throw a fit. He just pulled out his phone and started dialing his attorney. Within an hour, legal reps arrived, followed by 2 off-duty reporters Clarice had tipped off. By midnight, Ruben was released. No charges filed, no apology given. Outside, Ruben's eyes were tired but sharp. They're not playing anymore, he said. They never were, Shaq replied. But that was only the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, things escalated in ways Shaq hadn't predicted. Not this quickly, not this obviously. Ruben's bank accounts were suddenly frozen. The justification, a routine audit triggered by potential income discrepancies. Meanwhile, the private clinic Nia had started therapy with abruptly canceled her sessions. Contract terminated, they said. Misfiled insurance records. Then the landlord for a storage unit Ruben used to keep documents and personal files changed the locks. No notice, no access. Shaq was ready to sue them all. His lawyers advised caution. There's a coordinated pattern here, one said. But if we overplay this, they'll claim you're intimidating institutions. That you're using your celebrity to shield fugitives. Fugitives, Shaq growled. They're victims. Yes, the lawyer said quietly. Which is why they're dangerous to the people who buried them. On the 3rd day, Wallace called with another update. You were right about the car, he said. It's linked to a private investigative firm that's handled surveillance for both the state and one of the group home corporations named in Clarice's article. You're being watched, Shaq. Not just them. You. Shaq closed his eyes, breathing through the weight. He was no stranger to scrutiny. But this was different. This wasn't about tabloid curiosity or jealous critics. This was targeted, legal, weaponized silence. The next evening, he found Ruben on the back porch again, staring at the water like it owed him answers. They're coming at you now, Ruben said, because they couldn't silence me. Shaq sat beside him. They want us to blink, to get scared, to back down. Ruben nodded, or to make a mistake. Shaq glanced over. You planning to? No, Ruben said, but I've been close. They sat without words for a while. Inside the house, Naya played soft music on a small speaker, humming along with her fingers tracing the air in slow, thoughtful motion. Shaq finally broke the silence. They want us to feel alone, but we're not. Reuben didn't respond immediately, then said, maybe not in this house, but out there, we're ghosts again. That night, Shaq sent a message to every ally he had: athletes, entrepreneurs, organizers, faith leaders. He told them what was happening, sent copies of court filings, screenshots, timestamps. He didn't ask them to post or speak, just witness. By morning, the network had formed quietly beneath the surface, like an underground railroad made of email threads and encrypted texts. The truth was being kept alive, even if the public hadn't seen it yet. But Shaq knew the clock was ticking. The next play wouldn't be a frozen account or a closed case. It would be character assassination. And he wasn't going to let them write the script. Not this time. Sometimes the fire to fight comes from the ones who never stopped burning. The knock came early, before sunrise, before Shaq had even stirred from his restless sleep. 3 sharp raps, not impatient, but deliberate. Lucille didn't wait to be invited in. She never did. She stepped through the doorway with a folder under one arm, and a look in her eyes that said the temperature in the house was about to change. Shaq met her in the hallway, still in a t-shirt and sweats, barefoot, hair unbrushed. Lucille raised the folder like a flag and said, "You need to see this, now." They sat in the kitchen where the light came in slow and golden through the blinds, spilling across granite counters like melted brass. Lucille laid out the folder in front of him, her hands firm, steady. She didn't tremble, not even a little. Shaq opened it. Inside were photocopied police reports, aged and yellowed at the edges. There was an incident report dated May 14, 1974, from a downtown Newark precinct. Victim, Lucille Andrews, age 17. The charges? Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest. The real story was in the margins. Lucille had been walking home from work, a busboy apron stuffed into her bag, when 2 officers stopped her and asked for ID. She gave it. They claimed it was fake. They slammed her against a patrol car, cuffed her, called her fast, and said she was probably holding for someone. She had nothing on her. She was held overnight, no phone call. Her mother had to beg a church elder to come down and advocate for her release. She was bruised, she was humiliated. And then, like so many others, she was forgotten. The report included a note stamped across the bottom. No follow-up. Sealed. Internal review dismissed. Shaq read the documents twice, silently, then looked up.
You never told me.
Lucille leaned back in her chair. Would it have changed how you played the game? He swallowed. It might have changed what game I played. She shook her head. You needed your time to grow. I needed mine to survive. But now you need to know where your fight really comes from. Shaq felt the air shift inside him. All the recent battles, the fear, the media blackout, they suddenly felt older, rooted deeper, like they weren't just about Naya or Reuben, like they were echoes of something passed down, waiting for someone bold enough to dig them back up. Lucille wasn't done. She reached back into her bag and pulled out an old composition notebook, faded cover, worn edges. Inside were handwritten letters she'd written but never sent. Letters to city officials, journal entries, poems. One entry read, "They told me my silence would protect me, but it only protects them." Shaq felt the fire she carried, and something in him shifted. The hesitation that had clung to the edges of his advocacy. The fear of going too far, losing endorsements, being seen as more activist than athlete, burned away in that moment. "I want to do something different," he said. Lucille waited. "I want to make a docuseries," he continued. "Tell this story, not just Naya's, all of them, the whole machine, from your past to now. I want to call it America's Hidden Custody War." Lucille blinked. Once, slowly, then smiled, not wide, but full of knowing. "You think they'll let it air?" "I'm not asking permission." Within 24 hours, Shaq had assembled a team. Not network producers, not industry darlings, independent documentarians, grassroots videographers, and journalists who'd been blacklisted by bigger platforms for speaking too clearly. The blueprint was simple. Each episode would focus on a family buried by the system. Naomi and Naya's story would be the centerpiece, but the series would stretch across decades. Lucille's case in the 70s, 2 more recent ones from 2010 and 2018 that Clarice had already uncovered. They started filming in secret. Naya, hesitant at first, gave quiet testimony, not to a camera, but to an audio recorder. Her voice was small, unsure, but when she spoke about her mother's hands, about how Ruben hummed the same songs at night. The room stilled. Ruben only agreed after Lucille sat him down. "You think hiding keeps her safe?" she asked. "I know it does," he replied. "No, hiding makes it easier for them to pretend she was never here." Ruben didn't answer right away. Then finally, with his voice low and clipped, said, "Then we do it on our terms." They filmed him in shadows, his silhouette framed by warm light. He spoke of courtrooms where truth meant nothing, where judges looked past evidence to favor state contracts. He told stories of lost kids, files he couldn't save. And then, Naomi. The producers used public photos, news clippings, and digital reconstructions to piece her life together. She wasn't just a tragic figure. She was a mother who fought eviction notices, wrote petitions, helped organize neighbors to fix broken playgrounds and stop school closures. Shaq narrated those parts himself. His voice grounded the series, not as a celebrity, but as someone coming to terms with the fact that fame had kept him safe while others were being destroyed for existing. The first episode was scheduled to air on a global streaming platform that Shaq had invested in years ago. At first they hesitated. "Too risky," the exec said. Shaq leaned forward. "Pull the deal. I'll fund it myself." They caved. The trailer dropped 3 weeks later. 30 seconds long. Black screen. Then Lucille's voice. "They didn't silence me. They just waited for me to stop screaming." Cut to Shaq. "Now we scream together." It trended within minutes. #hidden custody war. And almost immediately, the retaliation began. Emails from lobbyists, subtle threats. 2 donors to Shaq's education fund pulled out. He was uninvited from a celebrity charity gala. Quiet blacklisting began to settle in like dust. Shaq didn't blink. At a press conference, when asked if he was worried about reputational damage, he said plainly, "I'm not a brand, I'm a man, and I'm not protecting my image while kids are getting erased." Lucille sat in the front row, didn't clap, just nodded once. That was enough. The series was set to release in 3 parts, with a 4th in development. All 3 would stream freely, no paywall, no ads. Shaq made sure of it. Naya's voice closed the first episode. "I didn't see what they looked like, but I remember how they made me feel, like I was never supposed to speak again. I am now." The final scene was a wide shot of her walking across the mansion's lawn, cane in hand. The camera pulling back to reveal not a mansion but a battlefield. Not in blood, but in truth. Lucille's reckoning wasn't revenge. It was legacy. And now, the world would see it. He was never meant to use his wealth this way, but maybe that's why it matters. The morning the first episode aired, Shaq didn't watch it live. He had already memorized every frame, every beat of the voiceover, every clipped inhale from Naya's recording. Instead, he stood at the edge of his lake, the water still as glass, and waited. It didn't take long. By noon, America's hidden custody war had gone viral. Not trendy, not buzzy, viral in the way a wound bleeds when it's finally reopened. The stories hit like shrapnel, not just Naomi's death and Naya's disappearance, but the full chain of cover-ups that tied them to corporate contracts, sealed courtrooms, and state-run silence. Everywhere, the world reacted. The hashtag surged. Naya lives, open the files, we see you now. Civil rights organizations called for hearings. Activists marched outside juvenile courthouses. Clergy took to pulpits. Students organized walkouts. And in Georgia, the mansion gates that once symbolized wealth now swung open wide and deliberate. Shaq didn't wait for the system to invite him to a table. He built his own. Beneath the curved awning of his circular driveway, he set up shaded tents, folding chairs, portable water stations, microphones. Lawyers stood beside organizers. Ruben's silhouette appeared in footage behind a thin screen during Q&As, voice disguised but unmistakably present. The grounds filled quickly. By the 3rd day, over 200 people gathered daily, not just to protest, but to plan. Survivors gave testimony. Parents whose children were seized after anonymous tips. Former foster kids who were lost in paperwork until they aged out. A black father who was jailed for contempt after attending a hearing without a tie. Their stories poured into the world like rain over dry ground. Shaq stepped into the noise without armor. He didn't hide behind a podium. He didn't wear the branded suits. Just jeans, t-shirts, and a fire that had stopped flickering. He pledged legal aid through his foundation. Then he announced something else. A new scholarship, in Naya's name. Full tuition for students in state care, children who'd been silenced, displaced, or erased. He called it the Naya Green Freedom Grant. He expected applause. He got tears. By the end of the week, his lawn had transformed. Where garden sculptures once stood, murals now bloomed, portraits of mothers holding invisible children, of gavel-shattered chains, of Lucille with her hand on Naya's shoulder like a general blessing her successor. Then the lawsuits came. 6 major filings. 3 aimed at George's Department of Child and Family Services, 2 targeting group home contractors with a history of violations buried under settlements, 1 filed directly against a sitting judge who had sealed a hearing after a child was injured in state custody. The machine had been forced into the light. But the light wasn't kind to everyone. Naya began shrinking beneath it. At first, she stayed inside, sitting near the back windows, feeling the hum of distant voices and music vibrating through the walls. Then she stopped eating at the table, began sleeping less, talking less. Her hands would twitch during the night. Her head would jerk at sudden sounds. The house was no longer quiet. It pulsed. One evening, Shaq found her curled in the music room, with a blanket pulled over her head. He crouched next to her gently. "Too loud?" he asked. She nodded, not pulling the blanket back. "I can take you somewhere quiet." She shook her head. "They all know me now." "No," he said. "They know your story, but they don't own you." Naya whispered, "I don't want to be a story anymore." The next morning, she was gone. No forced entry, no missing items, just her backpack, her cane, and a small envelope left on her neatly made bed. The letter was written in pencil, crooked but careful.
I love you all, but I need quiet. I need to hear myself again. Don't come looking. I'm safe. Please trust me. I just want to be invisible by choice this time.
Panic erupted. Search teams mobilized. Drones scanned the perimeter. Local police offered assistance but were politely declined. Shaq didn't want badges swarming, what had already become too much for her. He called Ruben. No answer. He called again. Nothing. That night, as the last activist van pulled off the lawn and the street returned to stillness, Shaq found a second envelope tucked beneath the porch bench. His name was on the front. Shaquille. Don't panic. She's not lost. She's just reclaiming what they tried to erase. I'll stay close, but not public. She deserves more than applause. She deserves peace. You've done more than enough. Now let her live. Not in their spotlight, but in freedom. Ruben? Shaq sat on the steps for a long time. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He breathed. Because somewhere deep down he knew this moment wasn't a tragedy. It was a release. The story had done its job. It had awakened a country to something it didn't want to see. And now, the 2 souls at the center of it, who had never asked for fame, only safety, had stepped out of its glare, finally owning their own ending. Shaq walked back inside and found Lucille sitting at the kitchen table. "She's gone," he said softly. Lucille nodded. That child was never meant to be caged in a movement. "Should we do more?" Lucille placed a hand over his. "Sometimes the most radical thing we can do is let the wounded rest." By week's end, the mansion slowly emptied. The protests had moved to courthouses and city halls. Laws had not yet changed, but the silence had been cracked, wide enough now for voices to pour through. The mansion gates remained open. Not for spectacle, for sanctuary. Artists came to paint. Volunteers came to organize. Families came to tell their truths. And every month, the Naya Green Freedom Grant received new applicants. Every story began differently, but all of them started with one shared belief. We were never invisible. We were unseen. Now, that had changed. Because a girl who couldn't see the world made it impossible for the world to keep pretending she wasn't there. Change begins the moment silence ends. She couldn't see faces, but now the world can see hers. The mountains were quiet in Oregon. Not city quiet, not suburban stillness masquerading as peace, but real quiet. The kind that lives between pine trees and runs its fingers through early morning fog. It wrapped around Shaq's Escalade as he drove up the long gravel path toward the Braillewood Academy for the visually gifted, a place tucked far enough from the world that only those truly looking for it ever found it. Shaq hadn't been here before, not in person, but he'd funded part of the new tech wing through the foundation 6 months back. The donation was anonymous. The purpose wasn't. He stepped out, the crisp air catching in his lungs. He wore no watch, no chain, no tailored jacket, just a hoodie, jeans, and a small canvas bag hanging from one shoulder. In it, a handheld audio recorder, a stack of stories narrated by survivors Naya had inspired, and one handwritten letter Ruben had left for him, never mailed, just folded between the pages of an old book Shaq had found in the mansion library, weeks after they'd disappeared. The main building rose humbly through the trees, glass and stone, warm wood panels. Not trying to impress anyone. It was designed with sound in mind. You could feel it as you walked. Every step echoed in harmony, never sharp. The walls curved inward in places, shaping voices gently toward the ears of children who didn't rely on sight. Shaq stepped inside. A receptionist greeted him in soft tones, already expecting him. "You're here for Naya," she said with a smile. "She's at the story lab. She doesn't know you're coming." Shaq smiled faintly. "Let's keep it that way." Down the corridor, the walls were covered in textured panels, finger-painted poems, sculpted self-portraits, braille murals etched into polished wood. No portraits, no images, just stories you could feel. He reached the lab and peeked in. Naya sat near the back, headphones on, her fingers gently tapping the tabletop in rhythm with a voice playing through her device. Around her, a few other students worked silently, some typing, others recording, a few simply listening. She looked taller. Her braids were shorter now, neatly wrapped. Her posture had changed. No longer guarded, but rooted. She wore a gray hoodie with the school's name embroidered across the chest in raised stitching. Shaq waited until the recording in her ears finished, then stepped forward, clearing his throat gently. She turned toward the sound. "Shaq?" He smiled. "Hey, superstar." She stood slowly, the edges of her mouth lifting into something soft but sure. "You found me." "I never stopped looking," he said. They sat together outside under the overhang, as rain began to whisper against the wood above them. It wasn't heavy, just enough to carry scent, pine, earth, possibility. Shaq handed her the canvas bag. She opened it carefully, fingers skimming the edges of the recorder and the flash drives inside. "These are stories, told by people who saw what you started. Survivors, kids from foster systems, former caseworkers, a few judges too. Some of them had never spoken out before. They needed someone to open the door." She tilted her head. "And you think I did that?" He looked at her, voice low. "You know you did." She nodded once. "I still don't like crowds." "That's okay," he said. "You don't need to be seen by many, just heard by the right ones." There was a pause, quiet and long, filled only with rain and breath. "I'm applying for a mentorship," she said. "They let us choose a focus. I told them I want to study law, disability and justice advocacy." Shaq blinked. "Like Ruben." She nodded. "Exactly like Ruben." He looked away, toward the trees. "You know where he is?" "No," she said, voice light. "But I think he's somewhere that smells like old books and sounds like jazz. And I think he knows I'm okay." Shaq chuckled. That's exactly what he would have said. They talked for another hour, about nothing urgent, about how her roommate sings too loud, about how she's learning coding through sound-based software, about how her favorite story from the docuseries wasn't her own but Lucille's. "She's like thunder in a calm body," Naya said. Shaq smiled. "Yeah, that's my mama." Eventually the clouds parted just slightly, the sun bending through like it was peeking in to check on them. "I don't want to be famous," Naya said suddenly. "I know. I want to be useful." Shaq's throat tightened. "You already are." They stood. She held the recorder close to her chest, her hands still as stone. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Only when you want me to." She turned toward the doors, but not before saying, "Next time I want to hear one of your stories." Shaq chuckled. "Deal." She walked inside, the soft clicking of her cane fading into the hallway like a whisper that refused to be lost. He stood alone for a while. Not out of sadness, but reverence. For the girl who'd taught him to see differently. For the child who had once only wanted to disappear, but instead reshaped the conversation for an entire country. Shaq turned back toward the path, the gravel crunching underfoot, and paused once more at the edge of the school gates. He looked out into the woods, eyes glassy but steady, and whispered to no one in particular. "Maybe this is what forever really looks like." Then he walked to his car, and left the gate open behind him. This isn't just a story, it's a mirror. If it made you uncomfortable, good. That means it reached you. Now ask yourself, how many Nayas live unnoticed in your city, your school, your block? You don't need a platform to fight for them. You just need the courage to stop looking away.